Hello and welcome. Today's video I'm going to go through the process of actually implementing the background. I'm also going to talk about props, and we're going to go through sorting orders and layers and some ways that this can be approached. As a reminder from the last video, there's a couple of different ways that you can approach creating the backgrounds. The first that's more traditional is if you do straight up tile maps and do that kind of implementation. For these videos, I'm using Unity as the primary game engine, so all the tool-specific information will be related to Unity, but these same principles can be applied to every kind of game engine you can think of that allows you to do 2D games. But as a resource, there's a lot of good content out there. If you want to do it the very traditional implementation way by using tile maps, Unity Tile Mapper is great, and I will put a link to this learning resource in the description. But there are a lot that you can look up. All right, so I'm going to jump straight into Unity right now. And I've created some background elements and props that I'm going to put in. But the first thing is that you need to make sure that they are clean. Right now, if I drop this in, looks great. The problem comes in if I hadn't already done the cleanup. So by default, it's set to bilinear and then like normal quality for the compression. You can see it's blurry, which doesn't work great. So you need to make sure that just like with the character, any new elements that you're adding into the scene in Unity, that you select it here in the project, and then you change the filter mode to point, no filter, and the compression to none, and hit apply. And that way it'll sharpen up and you'll get the nice clean pixels in here. All right, but I dropped that background in, and this can be a lot larger or a lot smaller. This is the equivalent of what I would build as the base background using tile maps if I chose that method. Now these do tile, so this is getting a similar effect as tile maps, but it's easier for me in a larger scene to just lay everything out in Photoshop and drop it in here. For the actual one that I created, there was another layer that extended on down below, and there were two more up, and then these could be extended out side to side in tile so that the player, as they're moving around, even though the screen it's 256 by 224, as the character moves around, I've got all this background that they shift around with. So if I had that, they would be, moving all over the screen. Let me take it back. But that'll hopefully give you the idea. But this is just like the base background. Now, on top of this, I will often need to create additional props. Now, those could be created for different reasons. So I'm going to show you a couple of different ones really fast. Apologize, I had to pause there for just a second. But I'm going to pop these up really fast and kind of show you how these can be utilized. The first is going to be just a background element where, because I didn't do this in a tile by tile format, if I want some kind of a custom tile piece that may be different or maybe animated, which is more likely, I need to create a custom prop. We're not going to worry about animating props right now. I'll do that in a few more videos, but I just want to show you the basic reasons for it and potentially some of the placement. So for this case, I can grab this panel and drop it in the scene, and then I can move it into place. And the cool thing is that within Unity, things out to the second decimal would be the equivalent of a pixel movement. So if I change this to like 128, that's 128 pixels from center. Let me move that back down to 0. So that's right there. And if I move this side to side, you can see it goes up or down. And so I'm going to shift this over here into place as close as I can get it. So I want to drop this behind this character here. And all I need to do to make sure it is actually pixel perfect and not going like halfway across the pixel, getting weird lines and edges, but truly pixel perfect, is to just take this to the closest pixel on here, change that to a 4, And there we go. It's exactly aligned back there where it needs to be. So there's the panel. And so once again, if I was animating it, I could have sparks coming off of this custom panel, or it could have a cover that the character interacts with, and the cover can flip open and they can do stuff there. So when I need something custom as part of the base background, this is a way that I can do it. You can also do the same thing if you're doing the tile system using like Tile Mapper, but then you would just do it within a singular tile, make that change. But when I'm doing it larger like this, where I'm just dropping in a larger image, this is another way that I can add elements to it to add additional customization for things that I need to. Another way this comes into play is for background elements or structural elements that the character needs to go in front of or behind. So after I lay this one down, then I'm going to introduce layers and the sorting order. So I'm going to drop this element in, and I will move it up into position. Get it to that nearest whole number. So 156, nope, 157. There we go. All right, so now this is aligned where I want it to be. And something cool about Unity that I can do is, rather than just taking this and duplicating it and repeating it, if I want to, I can also just change its draw mode. I can change this from simple to tiled. And then I can change this and increase that out. Currently it's at 64, but if I do 1.28, or excuse me, it's 512, so 5.12. Now that's spreading the 512 pixels, and it is just tiling horizontally across that width. And so this way I can add that in as an item. Now the place that this gets interesting is under the sorting. Now under each of these sprites that I select for each of the characters as well as the background elements, under the sprite renderer, there is this additional settings right here that I can expand. Now the sorting layer is a place where I can add new layers, and the order in the layer is what its position is within that layer. Sometimes students get confused about this, so think of it as a parent-child relationship. If I have, let me shift my camera over really quick. If I have books, this is the way you can think of it. Each book is a sorting layer, and I can adjust which layer is in which position. The sorting order would be the pages inside. So even though I may be a lower number in the sorting layer, like let's say page 2, and on this one I'm page 300, relative to the other pages it'll be in front of or behind, but in the order, if I shift those layers, it doesn't matter. Even if this is a higher or lower number, doesn't make a difference in the order of within the layer. It depends on the layer itself. So for example, I'm going to have 3 sorting layers. I'm going to do a background, a midground, and a foreground. So those are the layers. And then I can adjust things within those layers in their sorting order, or within the pages within that layer, if that analogy helps you visualize it a little more clearly. So let me jump back over here to look at the sorting or the layers versus the order in the layer. To create the layers, I simply come to the drop down and go add sorting layers. And if I hit plus, 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 and I will name these now. So background, midground, oh, if I can spell correctly, and foreground. So I've got those layers created. I need to reselect these elements over here to now actually access that. But for example, this background base, I can drop that to the background. And you notice it put everything else behind it because the default layer is actually behind these other layers. So everything else that's still in the default layer is going to disappear. But that's in the background. I'm going to grab this background rail and I'll put that in the background, but I'm going to change this order to 1. It brought it to the front, but it didn't need to, so I could actually set that to -5 and push it back any number that I want to. I can make these really high. Apparently the highest order in layer is 327, 67. So, I mean, that'll work. But I'm just going to change it to 1 for right now because I'm going to make a few other adjustments here. But that way I make sure that it's in front of this background base layer. Same thing for that panel. I'm going to make that a 1 in the order layer, but I need to make sure that's also on background. And so now as part of a background layer, it'll jump up. These characters I'm going to put into the midground layer to bring them up. They're currently 0 in the layer, but I can go through and adjust that order as well. And if I have something in the midground, I need to put it in front of or behind, I can adjust that. But as a layer itself, that layer is always going to be in front of, even though these are a 0 in the layer and that panel is a 1, they're still in front of it because as a layer, they are in front of it. And one thing you can do just for fun is research layers, how many layers can be active in the older games at the same time. And that'll give you an idea of how you can start setting up your game with the same thing, trying to figure out how the layers work. All right. So with some of those props in place, I want to talk a little bit about the placement and reasoning behind how you do things that you do, like why you do certain layers and certain orders based on the functionality. So if that banister is always in the background, then I can leave it on the background layer. But if it's something that the character is going to go behind, which is kind of the whole purpose of having this as its own standalone thing, was so that I could have the character go behind it. Not necessarily though. Sometimes I can have a background element that the character never interacts with, but I will still have as its own object, and that's for parallax effects. So for parallax, that's when you have things that are in the distance that as they move at different speeds I guess the foreground should be moving faster so that it makes it appear like you're getting more motion. It makes things appear further in the distance in relationship to each other. So I can do something like that for a parallax effect. But if I'm going to have the character actually interact with it, if the character is going to both go in front of and go behind it, then I might have it in the midground and just simply change the layer number. So at one point it's 1, at another point it's -1, because the player's going to go, crawl on one side and then go around behind it. And so I may have it in the midground for that. If the player will always be behind it, so let's say the character goes over to the side, up a set of stairs, and then goes up behind the banister, and at no point are they ever in front of it, then I might consider making that just a foreground element so that I never have to worry about whether the character is going to be in the right place, whether the banister is going to be read correctly. It's always just going to be in front. Wow, and sorry, just my nitpicky self. Apologize about my typing today. All right, anyway, so that's a reason that I could do it one way or another. For right now, I'll just leave it as a foreground element, assuming that character will never actually be in front of it on screen. They would go in a different place, and then when they come here, they'll always be behind it. But I'll lower this character down now. Now, as I was talking about the pixel perfection, things in Unity are pixel perfect, which is nice. So if I'm trying to figure out this position, as long as I don't change the scale and stuff, if I'm trying to figure out this position, make this to the whole number, make sure it's aligning. So that's great. I've got the character there. I'm going to add in a couple of additional elements in the midground so that I can start looking at, within that midground, how sorting layers, sorting orders work. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about adjusting your pivot, because that can lead to a lot of complications. Now, what I can do is I will drop this plant in. So I can either drop it straight into the scene and then bring it down. And if you notice, I can't see it. I need to set it to the midground so it brings it in front of there. I want it behind the character, so I'll make this -1 for now. And I can put it into position. In its position, make that to the second number after the decimal, so 3. And this one I'll just 1, 5. Yeah, that works. Okay, so now that's in position. I'm going to get another object right here, and this one I'll just drop into the scene right there. Once again, drop that into the midground. This one I will make it a 2, make sure it's in front of everything else. Bring it up in a position. Try and get this second whole number after the decimal. All right, there we go. And so if I move that player back and forth, it's getting it in the correct sorting order. But this is where it can start being fun. I'm going to take a moment here to talk a little bit. You know what? I am going to end this video here and come back with another video where I talk about setting up the sort order, because I'm going to go into how you can adjust pivots and some tools. For right now, for this video, hopefully this is at least giving you an idea of how you can set things up in a scene, how you can add in props, how you can set up different objects that will have different layer functionality. Also, how to set up your layers as well as their order in the layer. So anyways, play around with that. I'll do one more video right now and go into adjusting the pivot and some other ways that this can be applied when you actually go to program and develop your game. So anyways, see you in the next video.